Welcome back to pregame.tv. Another season win total from my man Bryan Leonard. We're going to take a look at the Chicago Cubs, the lovable Cubs. It's a team that, well, you know, you being a Mets fan, you could probably sympathize with the Cubs. In
106 years, most incredible stat in professional sports, especially from a major city. I got a story for you real quick. On my show, I actually had the last living relative of Al Capone, Deirdre Capone, who was his great niece, come on the show. Al Capone was this close to owning the Chicago Cubs. Apparently, he had a lot of dirt on the Wrigleys, and they were literally dealing. And right around that time is when he got nailed on the tax evasion. I mean, I told Chuck Edel, of course, my partner on Friday nights, who's the biggest Cub fan I know, I said, Chuck, you'd have had 10 World Series by now with old Capone owning the team.
This Chicago Cub team, Brian, I don't know which way you're going, but, you know, this is, you know, a younger club compared to some of the other teams. And not only are they a younger club with the roster that they're probably going to bring in to start the season, but this is one of the better teams with minor league prospects in all of baseball. And I know you're real big on this, and you're going to elaborate on that, I'm sure. But you always have that question of when they're going to pull the trigger and bring these prospects up, not to start the clock on the contract. So,
or on the Theo Epstein watch, you know, because we're waiting for them to deliver.
Yeah, and that's the thing out of a team like the Cubs. Expectations aren't high, so they can keep these guys in the minors a little bit longer. They're not going to make just a sudden reaction and bring them up early, which doesn't help my situation here because I'm going to play the Cubs over. But you talked about it, the minor leaguers. Overall, they're not overly stocked in the minor leagues, but they're top of the level guys. They're just about to come up here really good. Almora is going to be up in 2016, but they got Alcantara, Villanueva, Baez, and Bryant are all going to be up this year. And Baez and Bryant are going to be all-stars. And all these guys are infielders. We've already seen some of the good outfielders that just started to bring up. Junior Lake,
I like
3 home runs the other day. He's another one of their young players that are up there. And as opposed to the last video we talked about in Philadelphia, where you've got just an aging ball club, a team with a high payroll. You've got a Chicago Cubs here team, like I think they're the third lowest payroll in baseball, and I got a lot of good young talent on this team.
Let me get your take on Castro, because I know the kid defensively is a whiz. Only hit, what, 245 or whatever last year, but off the field, that's what scares me about Castro.
No, I like Castro. This is a guy who had one down year. I mean, he was the savior of this town for the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, he was like the next,
right.
next Ryan Sandberg or whatever. And Sean Dunston, yeah. And just one of those guys that put a lot of pressure on him. And once you start making some money, we all see it, get to that point where you're the man. I think that had some effect on him. And plus, they had so many people last year just telling him what he was doing wrong. And he just came out and said, he goes, I was listening to too many people in the past. He never had to worry about that before because he's got so much talent. So the guy come out and he had a bad down year last year, and now they got Javier Baez supposed to come up, play shortstop. This guy's going to be a stud, and now he's thinking, okay, now I got to get my act together. And they've seen enough out of him where they're going to move Baez to second base, and he's down in the minors right now trying to play second base because the second baseman they have right now are Darwin Barney, great defensive player, no stick at all.
So since they have a lot of money under the cap room, when do you see the Cubs getting active? Because a lot of the media there in Chicago. Not that they didn't get Tanaka, but they didn't even go after him and make an effort, and that ticked off a lot of people there.
Well, they don't have a cap in baseball, but they have, being in a big city, the thing with the Cubs is, and we've seen this for how many years, they've been so bad, but yet they sell out every game. It's one of those situations where there's never been any incentive for them to be a better team because all they're going to do is raise their payroll. Now they're to the point now where they brought in Theo Epstein. Now they're thinking, okay, we don't. They're not switching everything over and all of a sudden going out and buying those big free agents. They're putting it all into the minor leagues and it's starting to pay off. So, and that's what you got to do. Even though they're from a big city, we've seen it in Oakland, we see it in Cleveland, Kansas City. Just the smaller level teams are all investing in their minor leagues and they're having a lot of success.
Tell me about the starting rotation. You've got Jeff Samardzija at the top. And this guy, when he's on, he's got some of the best stuff in baseball, but I've seen too many times when he gets lit up as well. The inconsistency with him. He's the ace, but after that, where do you go on this starting staff? I'm not happy with the starting rotation.
Yeah, and all the players that they brought in have all been, regular players. They haven't been the pitching staff. They're probably 2 years away from getting a quality major league pitching staff. And Samardzija, he's a free spirit. He's an ex-football player, so I think that goes hand in hand right there. So he gets a little upset with himself if things don't go well. And so his bad outings are probably worse than most people's bad outings because he's got that mentality of being a football player where he gets upset at himself. And us as handicappers, we've been around long enough where we're going to have losing streaks, and we get down on ourselves, but we're not going to kill ourselves over it because we're older, we understand it a little bit. I think as this team gets better and as he gets a little bit older, I think he's going to become more consistent. He's got the stuff. I mean, he's got, you know, number one, number two starter material if he can just keep guys off of the base from the walks.
I'll tell you who impressed me last year at Wrigley Field was Edwin Jackson. His stats at Wrigley Field were way better than his stats on the road. Blew me away.
Edwin Jackson's been this way his entire career. Guys will bring it. He'll go to a new team and they'll think the good Edwin Jackson, and they go, man, we're getting a deal. We're getting a deal. But all the other teams are thinking, yeah, we've had him. We've seen the bad Edwin Jackson. So there's a lot. You know, talk about pitchers going out. You don't know what you're going to get, and that's the problem with Edwin Jackson.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying though. He surprised me because he pitched well in a hitter's park, and then he'd go on the road to some pitchers' parks and get lit up. So to have the ERA that he had at Wrigley Field was very surprising.
He's been an enigma to me all
his
the
entire
time.
career.
Yeah.
It was the guy that played for the Dodgers, played here for the 51s of the Dodgers. His name slips my mind right now. But he was the Dodgers' top prospect, pitcher. He went to like 3 or 4 different teams, and every team got all excited. This is the year we're going to have, and I apologize, I'm blacking out on the name. But it's very similar to him, and you see a lot of that.
Do the Cubs have a good pitching prospect in the minors that we might see mid-season or anything?
They've got a guy, CJ, can't think of his last name, but he's probably a year away. He's going to be in the rotation in 2015. So basically this year, if you'd like to play total, it's going to be a lot of high-scoring games with the Cubs because offensively, I believe they're going to be much better. Pitching staff is going to be very similar to what it's been, but they do have some talent there, and coming in the minors, it'll be 2015, 2016. And with the low payroll they have, if they are somewhat in contention, I could see them going out and maybe get one of the Philadelphia pitchers that I don't think are going to be there much longer.
Okay, well, you know what? We've talked about this enough. Let's make it official.
Last year, the Cubs only won 66 games. But once again, if you take their runs scored or runs against, they should have won 72.5 games. If you take the 2 hits equal 1 run, they should have probably won about 73 games. So I'm looking at a 72.5, 73 range in that. And right now we're getting them at over 70 at plus 100. I've got better numbers than that in my pocket, but this is turning into a popular play here. But we're still able to get over the 70. And as opposed to the last team I previewed, all these good players are younger on this team. None were rushed to sell tickets, as we pointed out earlier. This is not a team that has to sell tickets in order to make a profit. The Cubs are going to sell out every game. Everybody that's on vacation in Chicago wants to go to Wrigley Field. It's going to be a popular place, regardless of how good this team is. But as opposed to the other team I talked about, every projected starter on this team is 30 years or younger, with 4 being 26 years or younger. A very good combination of younger players who played together in the minors here. And once again, one of the lowest payrolls in baseball. So if they are contending, they can go out and spend a little bit of money, which we haven't seen out of Chicago over the years. Loaded with prospects. They're actually ranked the 4th best minor league system in all of baseball right now. It's kind of top heavy. They've probably got 6 guys at the top level. They still need to build the bottom level a little bit, but they got some good young players on this team. And I talked about, you know, Baez and Chris Bryant coming up. I believe they'll be all-stars. They're going to have Bryant at third base, Castro at shortstop, Baez at second base, and Rizzo at first. There's not a better young infield in Major League Baseball. This is going to be a great infield. Junior Lake in the outfield. They get a couple other good outfielders out there. This is going to be a good, very good everyday lineup. They're going to score a lot of runs. Unfortunately, the pitching staff, as we talked about, is going to give up a lot of runs right now. In the future, they'll be much better, but they're going to get some of these younger guys a chance to get out there. And it's in a division right now where I don't really care for this division. I think everybody in this division, other than the Brewers, who I think are a little bit improved, they're all going to take a step back this year. Mark already talked about, you know, the Pirates in an earlier video. The two guys I was worried that they would keep, they sent them back down to the minors. So I think the Pirates under is another good play. But this entire division, I think, is going to step back. It's going to give the Brewers and the Cubs a better chance to move up, and I think they're both quality over plays. I haven't played the Brewers yet. I don't know if I will. If I get a 79, I might play it. But I played the Cubs over. I got a lot of Cubs over here, and I think this is a good young team. It'll be fun to watch. And for once, the Cubs have a future, and I think it starts this year.
You know, and Brian, you've got the season win total. Obviously, the Cubs are going to be an underdog in the majority of their ball games this year. You know, more of them just because of the division they're in. You know, they're going to be the last thought in that division after St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Milwaukee. You know, you got to go the whole way down the list before you get to the Cubs in the conversation. Good team, maybe, you know, you don't want to just blindly play a team, but this is going to be a team that's going to be a live dog with that offense this year.
Yeah, anytime you got a team that's expected to win 70, obviously they're going to be an underdog in the majority of their games.
Ruggiano and Shearholtz, if those two guys can help Rizzo out in the power department, this team they can put up some runs. I agree with you.
And they both have enough speed where they can steal some bases and just keep the other team off balance a little bit, the pitching staff. And this is a team, anytime you have a lot of young players, at least in my regard, you're going to have a lot of guys that are going to cause some trouble on the bases. And there's nothing that a veteran pitcher, and there's a lot of veteran pitchers in this division here, that upsets them more than having a guy jumping up and down over first base or whatever and throwing them a little bit off their game. I think the Cubs are going to surprise some people this year.
And you make good sense, too, with the two young guys possibly coming up middle of the season. A lot of pressure on Barney, a lot of pressure on Murphy to get their bats going early at third and second.
Yeah, and actually, they made it known that Barney's up for trade, and there's a lot of teams out there right now that need middle infielders. Barney played some shortstop in the past, and although he's a second baseman, he can play short. Right. And right now, you can go around Major League Baseball. I've probably got 3 or 4 teams right now that are desperate for a shortstop.
That's a good call. Only reason he's not is because of Castro. That's a good call.
And that top pitching prospect was C.J. Edwards.
C.J. Edwards, correct.
All right, great stuff from Brian. He says to take the Cubs over. That's going to wrap it up for this week. We'll be back next week, Elite 8 next week, and get them working. No, we'll be Final Four next week. I'm sorry.
We'll be Final Four.
Yeah, we'll be Final Four. Elite 8 will be Saturday and Sunday. We'll be back next week. We'll break it down. NFL or NBA closing out, and then of course Major League Baseball gets started this Sunday. The Dodgers again. They'll be playing their third game.
You mean it gets started in this country?
In this country, yeah.
And the good news is, at this point, we're all undefeated. I think we're combined 1-0 in Major League Baseball this year.
All right. He's Bryan Leonard, Ken Thomson, yours truly, Marco D'Angelo. We'll be back next week.